From alt season to air pocket, how liquidity left crypto in 2025. Flint West reporting. All right, listen up. People love to explain markets like they're morality plays. They want villains, they want heroes, they want a headline that fits inside a tweet. Solana hype, Ethereum failure, Bitcoin cycle, ETF flows, whales, retail. Nah. 2025 wasn't a story about who was right. It was a story about who still had bids. Because markets don't die when the chart breaks. Markets die when sponsorship disappears. And the cleanest way to see sponsorship leave isn't price. It's relative momentum. Section 1. Where we stand. Here's where we stand. The stake in the ground. The thing we can say with our chest. We moved from rotation to withdrawal, not risk off as an event, liquidity extraction as a regime. And the earliest tell wasn't the Bitcoin dump. It was the way the race changed inside crypto. Solana against Ethereum kept climbing while relative strength peaked and fell. That's not strength. That's exhaustion disguised as continuation. That divergence was the market saying, Solana is still winning, but the winning is slowing. And once the winning slows, the next part is always the same. Risk compresses upward before it exits. Altcoins bleed into Ethereum. Ethereum bleeds into Bitcoin. Bitcoin absorbs the last real demand. And then the whole complex starts flying through thin air. That's the position. Section 2. The bigger picture? You want the bigger picture? Good. Because the bigger picture is what makes this more than vibes. This story rests on 5 foundations. First, relative momentum leads absolute price. Most people are trained to worship price. Price is the smoke. Momentum is the heat. Relative strength on a ratio chart is asking one simple question. How hard is the outperformance accelerating? So when Solana against Ethereum relative strength peaks and starts falling while the ratio itself keeps grinding higher, we get the cleanest signal in markets. The marginal buyer is fading, not gone. Not bearish tomorrow morning, just fading. It's like a sprinter still moving forward, but the burst is over. That's what divergence really is. Continuation in price, decay in impulse. And that's why ratio divergences matter so much. Because they're not measuring one asset. They're measuring the contest. And contests don't end when the scoreboard changes. They end when the crowd stops cheering. Second, risk compresses upward before it exits. Crypto is a risk ladder, a hierarchy. At the bottom sit the most optional, most speculative names, the altcoins. Then comes Ethereum, the benchmark for the alt complex. Then comes Bitcoin, the asset that becomes quality inside crypto, even if it's still volatile in absolute terms. When liquidity tightens, we don't get everything down at once. We get capital migration. We get altcoins underperforming. Ethereum losing leadership versus Bitcoin. Bitcoin dominance rising. That is not panic. That is prioritization. It's the market saying, if we're going to own something here, it's going to be the thing that survives the longest. So the idea that Solana lost momentum against Ethereum because Ethereum was losing momentum against Bitcoin isn't just plausible. That's literally how the ladder works. Solana against Ethereum rolls first. Ethereum against Bitcoin stays heavy. Bitcoin dominance rises. That's the sequence. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Third, macro shocks accelerate what's already unstable. Now let's talk about the myth people tell themselves. They say it was the tariffs, it was that one day, it was that one headline. No, headlines don't cause regimes. They reveal them. Liberation Day matters, yes, but not because it was magical, because it landed on a market that was already stretched, already leveraged, already dependent on continuation. If the system is healthy, shocks get absorbed. If the system is fragile, shocks crack the surface. Macro shock equals gravity reminder. Then comes the next shock. October 10th, that wasn't a vibe shift, that was structure failing. Leverage gets blown out, liquidity thins, market makers widen, every bounce becomes an opportunity for trapped money to leave. That's the plane hitting a pocket of empty air, not because the pilot forgot how to fly, because the air itself got thinner. Fourth, global liquidity and American triage. Now zoom out. This is where things can sound prophetic if we don't say them carefully. Here's the careful version. The United States doesn't wake up and decide to save Bitcoin, but it does operate inside constraints. And when constraints tighten, systems perform triage. The triage looks like this: rolling over a massive debt load coming due, keeping equities, technology, and artificial intelligence infrastructure from collapsing, managing a world that is increasingly not naturally supporting treasury demand, and deciding how much political oxygen to spend on crypto architecture, stablecoins, regulation, legitimacy. The principle is simple. When refinancing gravity is large and marginal demand is uncertain, liquidity gets rationed. And the first assets to be rationed out are always the ones that are most leveraged, most narrative-driven, most optional, easiest to sell, and least institutionally protected. That's altcoins. Then crypto more broadly. Then broader risk if the stress persists. Crypto was not the priority when the liquidity pie shrank. Fifth, absence of confirmation is the signal. This is where analysts separate from entertainers. Entertainers tell you what will happen next. Analysts tell you what is missing. In a true expansion regime, sponsorship leaves fingerprints. Bitcoin dominance rolls over. Ethereum against Bitcoin stabilizes and reclaims trend. Ratio charts re-accelerate instead of grinding. Momentum rebuilds across the complex, not just price bouncing. When those signals aren't present, rallies are not beginnings. They are inventory events. They are exits disguised as hope. So the signal isn't just downtrend. The signal is that no one is stepping in with conviction to restart the ladder. That's thin air. Section 3. The full story. Straight through. Here's the film reel. 2024 into early 2025 gave us alt-season behavior. Solana outperformed Ethereum. Ethereum participated. Everyone felt immortal. Then the first crack appeared. Solana against Ethereum momentum peaked. Relative strength fell. Price kept climbing. That was the earliest warning. The impulse was fading. The marginal bid was weakening. Liberation Day hits. Uncertainty rises. Liquidity tightens. The rotation begins. Not crypto dying. Crypto consolidating around quality. Altcoins leak into Ethereum. Ethereum can't hold leadership versus Bitcoin. Bitcoin dominance rises. That's rotation up the risk curve. Then October 10th hits. Leverage breaks. Liquidity thins. The ladder collapses. Now Bitcoin itself falls. And that's the transition that matters most. When Bitcoin falls after altcoins are already drained, this is no longer rotation. This is exit. Liquidity leaving the building. The market moves from who is winning to who can still get out. That's the air pocket. And once you're in thin air, price lies, because the order book lies. Section 4, the closing. So if someone asks what this was, we don't say Solana got weak, Ethereum underperformed, Bitcoin corrected. We say 2025 was a staged liquidity extraction. It appeared first in relative momentum divergences, then in risk compression, then in full asset class de-risking after leverage failed. And the final line is the one that matters most. By the time Bitcoin started falling, the market wasn't rotating, it was emptying. That's the map. And once we have the map, we stop arguing with candles and start tracking the only thing that matters. Is the air getting thicker or thinner? Flint West signing off.